There are plenty of unsolved mysteries in the world that defy all reason and logic, cases that even decades later leave investigators and historians baffled. But few stories are as chilling or as bizarre as the murder of Magda Hamilton, a woman seemingly killed by someone who was already dead. The story begins in the late 1870s when a certain Ada Danforth and her young ward Fanchon Moncare were frequent travellers aboard the luxurious transatlantic voyages between New York and Europe. They always travelled in style, charming everyone who crossed their path. Passengers were particularly complimentary about the delicate Fanchon, whose sweet smile and impeccable manners won everyone over. Ada would go to great lengths to explain that Fanchon was an orphan, the sole survivor of a tragic fire, who was set to inherit a fortune when she turned 18. But until that day came, Ada was her legal guardian. Fanchon avoided too much conversation with the other passengers. When the questions became too intrusive, she'd simply give a polite curtsy, then skip away with her most prized possession, an elaborately dressed china doll, never out of her sight. But beneath this innocent facade, Ada and Fanchon were hiding several terrible secrets. You see, Fanchon wasn't a child at all. She wasn't even a young girl. Her real name was Estelle Ridley, and she was actually a 43-year-old dwarf who'd spent most of her life as a circus performer before turning to thievery on a grand scale. Her small stature and childlike features made her the perfect accomplice in an elaborate smuggling operation that had gone undetected for years. For Ada and Estelle had found an ingenious way to move stolen jewels across borders without raising the slightest suspicion. Their plan was as clever as it was simple. While Ada busied herself with the luggage and played the doting guardian, Estelle, masquerading as Fanchon, would skip through customs unnoticed. The stolen gems? They were hidden in the hollow head of Fanchon's beloved china doll. Upon arriving in New York, the pair would make their way to Chinatown where they had a contact, an elderly man named Wing To, who would help them retrieve the gems. The doll's head would be unscrewed, revealing their glittering prize, and then the cycle would begin again. For years, their scheme was flawless. They amassed a small fortune, and no one ever suspected that Fanchon, the poor little orphan, was actually a hardened criminal. But every perfect plan eventually unravels. Estelle, despite her cold-blooded nature, had one weakness: her heart. On one of their voyages, she crossed paths with Darnay Crawley, a handsome but reckless high-stakes gambler. Estelle was captivated by him and frequently talked of quitting her career as a criminal to live a life of luxury as Darnay's wife. Unfortunately, she faced stiff competition as Crawley's charm had caught the eye of another woman, Magda Hamilton, a beauty known as much for her ruthless ambition as her taste in dangerous men. What followed was a bitter rivalry between the two women, one that would ultimately lead to both their downfalls. Unlike Estelle, Magda wasn't content to fight fair. She knew that Estelle and Ada were hiding something, and after a few discreet inquiries, she learned the truth about their criminal enterprise. With one whispered conversation with the authorities, Magda sealed Estelle's fate. On their next return to New York, Ada and Estelle were met by customs officers, and for the first time ever, Fanchon's china doll was taken away and searched. When the jewels were discovered, Estelle and Ada were arrested on the spot. The courtroom was packed for their trial, as the details of their deception ignited public curiosity. But the most dramatic moment came when Estelle, standing in shackles, saw Magda in the gallery, smiling smugly. Consumed with rage, Estelle leapt to her feet and pointed a trembling finger at Magda. In a voice shrill with hatred, she made a chilling vow. I will kill you for this, even if I have to crawl out of my grave to do it. Estelle was sentenced to life in prison. Ada, an accessory to the crime, received 20 years. And as Estelle was dragged from the courtroom, her eyes never left Magda. Her words hung in the air like a curse, one that would haunt Magda for the rest of her life. For a while, Magda flourished. She fulfilled her ambition of marrying Darnie Crawley, and for a few months they lived very happily together, until Darnie abandoned her to pursue a gold mining venture in California. But once again, Magda came out on top, with a generous divorce settlement that left her in a very comfortable position. She invested wisely and soon became a prominent member of New York society. Years passed, and the memory of Estelle Ridley began to fade. Magda believed that the page had finally turned on that awful chapter of her life, until one night when absolutely everything changed. Magda awoke suddenly in the dead of night, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what had disturbed her sleep, but as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she froze. There, at the foot of her bed, stood Estelle Ridley. But this was not the youthful, vibrant Estelle she had once known. The figure before her was withered and grotesque, bent with age, her face gaunt and hollow, her lips pulled back in a twisted, toothless grin, and in her hands, that same china doll, now worn and decayed with time. Magda's scream echoed through the house as she bolted for the bathroom, locking herself inside. For hours she huddled in terror, refusing to leave until the first light of dawn streamed through the window. The following morning, Magda stormed into the police station, demanding to know why she hadn't been informed about Estelle Ridley's escape from prison, and insisting that she was given police protection until this dangerous fugitive was caught. But the officers just stared at her in confusion. One of them passed her a copy of the New York Sun from the previous week. The headline was clear: Estelle Ridley, dead by suicide. Prisoner hangs herself in cell. Magda left the police station, shaken to the core. Estelle had been dead for days, but yet she'd seen her, clear as day, standing in her bedroom. Desperate to escape, Magda made immediate plans to leave the country. That very afternoon, she booked passage on a Cunard liner to Europe, vowing never to return to America's shores. In the evening, she dined with a close friend and told him of her plans, convinced that this was the only way she'd be safe from the haunting spectre of Estelle Ridley. But Magda never made it aboard that ship. The next morning, her servants found her dead. The coroner's report was grim. Magda had drowned in her own blood. Her throat had been ruptured as though a large object had been rammed down it with considerable force. No murder weapon was ever found, but there was one chilling clue. In Magda's bloodied mouth were several coarse strands of hair of a variety that were usually used in the wigs of old china dolls. Estelle Ridley's promise had been fulfilled. She had come back from the grave to claim her revenge.